The city of Varrock shone under twin suns, its towering spires casting long shadows across the grand arena. Thousands of alien voices roared in unison, each one eager to see blood spilled on the sand. The arena floor was a sea of heat and dust, a place where champions rose or died without mercy. Kieran had never seen so many eyes fixed on him before. The human stood in the center of the ring, dressed in simple leather armor and holding a spear. Around him, the crowd chanted the name of their champion, a giant beast of a warrior named Therval, whose victories were carved into the very walls of the arena. The announcer's voice boomed, declaring that today would be the human's last day alive. It had not started as a fight for glory. Days earlier, Kieran had been nothing more than a trader passing through Varrock. He had sold scraps, tools, and old tech in the market when soldiers surrounded him. They claimed he had insulted the Emperor, though he had said nothing. His protests were ignored, and before he could understand what was happening, he was dragged through the streets toward the arena's prison cells. Inside the damp cell, Kieran had heard whispers from other captives. Some said humans were brought here to die quickly for sport. Others said the Emperor's champion had never been defeated, and killing a human was just another way to prove his strength. Kieran sat in silence, his mind steady, his eyes cold. If they wanted him to die, they would have to earn it. On the day of the fight, the gates opened with a grinding roar. The sunlight hit his face as he stepped into the arena. He could smell the metallic scent of old blood in the air. Across from him, Therval entered through the opposite gate, his massive frame covered in bone-plated armor, a jagged sword resting on his shoulder. The crowd erupted, the sound shaking the ground beneath Kieran's feet. Therval grinned, showing teeth as sharp as blades. He shouted a challenge in his own language, a sound that was more like a growl than words. Kieran did not understand it, but he knew its meaning well enough. The beast was telling him he would not leave this arena alive. Kieran raised his spear, adjusting his stance, every muscle ready for what was to come. The gong sounded, and Therval charged forward like a storm. Sand flew beneath his heavy boots. Kieran sidestepped the first swing, feeling the air tremble as the blade passed inches from his head. The crowd roared in approval, expecting the human to be torn apart in moments. But Kieran's eyes never left his enemy's center mass. Every breath was measured. Every step was planned. When the champion swung again, Kieran ducked low, driving the butt of his spear into the back of Therval's knee. The giant stumbled, but did not fall. A guttural snarl escaped his throat, and his next attack came even faster. This time, Kieran met the strike head-on, parrying with the spear's shaft and twisting his body to absorb the impact. The clash of metal and wood echoed across the arena. The fight had just begun, but the crowd was already restless. They had expected fear. They had expected the human to run. Instead, they saw something else: calm, focus, and the quiet readiness of a man who had fought battles far worse than this. Somewhere in the stands, the Emperor leaned forward, his golden eyes narrowing as he studied the human below. The sand was hot beneath Kieran's feet, but his focus never wavered. Therval moved with brutal speed for his size, each step making the ground tremble. The human had fought predators before, but this was different. This was a creature trained to kill for the roar of the crowd, for the glory of an emperor who ruled through fear. Therval raised his sword high, the jagged edge catching the sunlight. He brought it down with the force of a falling boulder. Kieran slid to the side, the blade slamming into the sand where he had been standing. A cloud of dust rose around them, and the crowd screamed for blood. Kieran tightened his grip on the spear, feeling the weight of the moment press against him. The champion attacked again, swinging wide. Kieran blocked with the spear's shaft, the vibration running up his arms. He stepped in close, driving his elbow into the beast's side. Therval barely moved, but his snarl deepened. A scar across his jaw twitched as if the blow had insulted him more than hurt him. Kieran's eyes scanned for weakness. The bone armor was thick, but the joints were exposed when their volume moved. Every fighter had a gap, no matter how strong. The key was to force them into a position where that gap could be used. Kieran shifted his stance, letting the champion think he was losing ground. Their volume roared, charging again. The force of his run pushed the air ahead of him. Kieran waited until the last moment, then rolled to the side, bringing the spear up as he passed. The sharpened tip scraped across the back of the champion's knee. A thin line of dark blood appeared, and the crowd gasped. It was small damage, but it was the first sign the champion could bleed. The noise from the stands grew louder. Some chanted for the champion. Others began shouting for the human. The Emperor's face remained unreadable, but his fingers tapped the arm of his throne. Kieran ignored them all. He knew this fight was more than sport. In this empire, survival in the arena could mean freedom, but defeat would mean death without. A name. The champion circled now, slower, his eyes locked on the human. Kieran kept moving, never letting his back stay in one place. Sand clung to his boots. Sweat rolled down his temple. He felt the strain in his arms but did not show it. There. Val's breathing had changed, deeper now, more deliberate. The beast was taking him seriously. Kieran feinted left, then lunged right. His spear struck the champion's side, but the bone plating deflected most of the force. Therval's counter came like lightning. The jagged blade slashed through the air, catching Kieran's shoulder. Pain burned down his arm, but his grip held. Blood dripped onto the sand, and the crowd erupted again. This was what they had come to see. The injury forced Kieran to adapt. His left arm moved slower, so he shifted his spear handling to favor his right. The champion pressed harder now, sensing weakness. But every time fair volume struck, Kieran gave just enough ground to stay alive. The spear became not just a weapon, but a shield, deflecting blows that could shatter bone. Then came a sudden shift. Fair volume overreached, his blade swinging wide. Kieran stepped inside the arc, ramming the spear's butt into the champion's ribs. The beast stumbled, just for a heartbeat. It was not enough to end the fight, but it was enough to show Kieran that the impossible might be closer than the crowd believed. The crowd's chants became a storm of sound that filled every corner of the arena. Some shouted for the human's blood, while others had begun to cheer his name. The shift in the air was subtle but real. Kieran could feel it. They had come, expecting a slaughter, but now they were watching a contest where the outcome was no longer certain. Fair volume wiped the dark blood from the back of his knee and looked at it with a snarl. His jagged teeth gleamed in the sunlight, and his massive shoulders rolled like boulders, preparing to crush anything in their path. Kieran held his ground, adjusting his stance so his good arm could bear the spear's weight. The wound on his shoulder burned, but his mind was clear. The champion came forward again, slower this time, testing. Each step was deliberate, his weapon angled to keep Kieran from closing in. The human matched the rhythm, circling, never letting the champion dictate the space between them. The sand shifted under their boots, creating a dance that only the fighters understood. Every step, every twitch of muscle carried meaning. Kieran decided to bait him. He lowered the spear slightly, letting it seem as if his guard had weakened. The champion's eyes flashed with the chance for a killing blow. Fair volume lunged, swinging high toward Kieran's head. The human ducked under the arc, driving the spear forward into the gap at the champion's side. The point struck true, and the force made Fair volume grunt in pain, but the beast's strength was far from spent. With a roar, he backhanded Kieran across the face. The world tilted for a heartbeat, and the human staggered back, tasting blood. The crowd screamed at the sudden turn. Some laughed, thinking the human's end had finally come. But Kieran planted his feet again, refusing to give the champion the satisfaction of seeing him fall. Fair Volume pressed harder, attacking with a fury meant to overwhelm. His strikes came from every angle, forcing Kieran to spin, block, and retreat. Each clash rang through the arena like the strike of a great bell. The heat was merciless, and sweat blurred Kieran's vision, but his instincts sharpened. He was not just fighting for survival now. He was fighting to win. The champion swung low, aiming for Kieran's legs. The human jumped back, the blade missing him by inches. As his boots hit the ground, he thrust the spear toward Therval's throat. The beast deflected it with the flat of his blade, sparks flying as metal scraped against hardened steel. The sound was swallowed by the roar of the spectators who could not look away. Then Kieran noticed something. Each time the champion blocked, his right arm slowed slightly afterward. The massive muscles there were tiring, perhaps from the weight of the weapon. Kieran knew this was his chance, but he had to be careful. A mistake now would end everything in a single blow. He shifted his attacks to that side, forcing the champion to block again and again. Fair Volume snarled, sensing the strategy but unable to avoid it without exposing other weaknesses. His breath was heavier now, his steps slower. The human's persistence was carving away at his endurance. The fight was no longer about brute strength alone. It had become a test of who could read the other better, and who could last longer under the crushing weight of the crowd's eyes. Kieran feinted left, forcing the champion to swing wide. In that instant, he stepped in and drove the spear butt into Therval's elbow joint. The beast roared in pain, the arm jerking back involuntarily. The weapon dipped, and for the first time, the champion looked truly vulnerable. The crowd gasped, sensing that the tide might be turning in favor of the human. The arena's heat pressed down like a living thing, but Kieran's mind stayed sharp. His eyes locked on the injured arm of Therval, knowing that every second of pain weakened the champion further. The crowd's shouts blended into a wall of sound, but the human only heard the steady rhythm of his own breathing. Therval snarled again, lifting his massive sword with both hands now to hide the weakness. He stepped forward with a sweeping strike, meant to push Kieran back. The human retreated just enough to avoid the blade's edge, then darted in with a quick jab of his spear toward the exposed knee. The tip scraped across bone armor, sending a shiver of frustration through Kieran. The champion countered with a sudden kick, his heavy boots smashing into Kieran's chest. The force sent him skidding across the sand, his boots digging trenches in the dirt. Pain rippled through his ribs, but he stayed upright. Therval charged, hoping to finish him while he was off balance, but Kieran sidestepped and thrust the spear toward the champion's side again. This time the strike bit deeper, slipping into the gap between plates. Dark blood spilled across the sand, and the crowd erupted into deafening cheers and jeers. The champion's eyes widened for a fraction of a second before narrowing into pure rage. He swung his sword in a wild arc, forcing Kieran to leap back. Once more, the Emperor leaned forward on his throne, golden eyes glinting in the sunlight. His fingers tightened on the armrests as he watched the human fight with precision and defiance. Around him, alien nobles whispered in disbelief. To them, the champion was unbeatable. Yet here stood a man from a distant world, refusing to bow. To fear, Therval's attacks grew more desperate. The once perfect timing of his strikes began to break apart. He was still deadly, but the rhythm was changing. Kieran pressed the advantage, forcing him to block and retreat. Every clash of spear and sword sent vibrations up Kieran's arms, but he held firm, knowing each second drained more of the champion's strength. The sand beneath their feet was now darkened with blood from both fighters. Kieran's shoulder throbbed, but he ignored it. His focus was fixed on the moment, the space between strikes, the small openings that could end the fight. Therval swung again, slower than before, and Kieran stepped inside the blow, slamming The spear shaft across the champion's jaw. The impact made the beast stumble, his massive frame tilting sideways. The crowd gasped as Kieran moved in with another attack, this time aiming low. The spear tip sliced across the champion's thigh, drawing another roar of pain. Each wound was small, but together they were breaking down the giant's endurance. There. Val's breathing had turned into a deep, ragged growl. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with blood. Kieran could see the weight of the fight pressing on him. The champion tried to rally, lifting his sword for a final crushing blow, but his injured arm trembled under the strain. Kieran braced himself, ready to meet the attack head-on. The swordsman's strike came down like a falling tower. Kieran caught it with the spear, the shaft bending under the force. For a heartbeat, they were locked in place, strength against strength. Then Kieran twisted, letting the blade slide past, and drove his knee into the champion's chest. Volume stumbled back, his grip loosening for the first time in the fight. The champion's stumble gave Kieran a chance he had been waiting for. He moved in fast, pressing the attack before Volume could recover. The spear darted forward in sharp, precise strikes, each aimed at a weak point in the armor. The giant blocked some, but more than one strike found its mark, and each one drew fresh blood. Therval's breathing grew harsher, the sound carrying even over the noise of the crowd. His steps had lost the crushing force they once carried. Instead, there was weight in them now, the weight of exhaustion. Kieran's eyes never left him, watching every twitch of muscle, every shift in balance, ready to take advantage of the next mistake. The crowd's energy shifted again, their chance. A mix of excitement and disbelief. Some began shouting the human's name, their voices rising over the rest. In the imperial box, the emperor's gaze sharpened. He leaned forward, his lips curling into the faintest trace of a smile. The nobles beside him exchanged uneasy glances. Val swung high, aiming for Kieran's head. The human ducked low and thrust upward, the spear's point striking beneath the champion's arm. The beast roared in pain, staggering sideways. Kieran followed with a sweeping strike to the legs, forcing him further off balance. The sand beneath them shifted in chaotic patterns as they moved. The champion's weapon dipped slightly, his grip faltering for the first time. Kieran could feel the end approaching, but he did not rush. He knew a desperate opponent was still dangerous. Instead, he circled slowly, forcing Volume to turn, making him feel the weight of every movement. The blood dripping onto the sand left a dark trail between them. With a sudden burst of energy, Volume charged again. The force of his rush pushed Kieran back several steps, but the human held his ground. Their weapons clashed, sending a shock through both fighters' arms. Kieran twisted the spear and shoved, forcing the champion's blade away before stepping in close. Kieran's shoulders slammed into Therval's chest, the impact rattling both of them. The giant stumbled back, his breathing now almost a growl. The human pressed forward, delivering another strike to the thigh. Therval's leg buckled slightly, and the crowd roared at the sight. Every blow now was stripping away the champion's dominance. The fight had become a test of will. Neither man spoke, their silence broken only by the sound of steel, sand, and strained breath. Kieran's arms ached, but his focus was sharper than ever. He knew that one perfect moment could end it all. The only question was whether it would be his strike or the champion's that decided it. Therval's swings slowed further, his power fading with each exchange. Kieran deflected a heavy blow and countered with a strike to the ribs. The beast winced but kept his guard high. The human stepped to the side, shifting angles, making the champion work harder to keep up. The sand was now a battlefield marked with lines of struggle. For a moment, they stood still, eyes locked. The champion's chest rose and fell like a war drum. Kieran's breathing was steady, his spear ready. Around them, the crowd's voices reached a fever pitch, their excitement feeding into the air like fire to dry grass. Both fighters knew the next exchange could decide the outcome. Asterisk, the air in the arena felt heavier now, as if the whole place was holding its breath. Therval's chest rose and fell in deep, ragged bursts. The power in his swings was still there, but the speed was gone. Kieran could see the fatigue written in every movement. Every slow step the champion took toward him, Kieran shifted his weight, keeping the spear pointed forward. The sand was uneven from their movements, each patch marked by the battle that had dragged on far longer than the crowd expected. Therval gritted his teeth, his eyes burning with fury that was slowly being replaced by desperation. The human moved first, darting forward with a quick thrust toward the weakened leg. Therval tried to block, but the spear's tip slipped. Pashton struck home. The champion roared, his knee buckling for a moment before he forced himself upright again. The noise from the stands shook the walls of the arena. Therval answered with a wild overhead swing. Kieran stepped aside, the blade slicing the air where he had been a second earlier. Before the champion could recover, Kieran struck at the ribs again, the spear biting into a joint in the armor. The sound of cracking bone echoed faintly under the crowd's cheers. Blood now streaked both fighters. Kieran's shoulder burned with each movement, but he ignored the pain. He knew he was closing in on the end. Therval's steps grew heavier, and his stance loosened. The once proud champion now looked like a wounded predator clinging to the last scraps of strength. Kieran pressed the attack, forcing the champion to retreat step by step. The sand shifted underfoot, but the human's movements were steady, controlled. Each strike came with precision, pushing the beast back toward the center of the arena. Therval's growls turned into deep grunts, each one harder than the last. The Emperor watched silently from his throne. His golden eyes were locked on the fighters, his face unreadable. Around him, nobles leaned forward, drawn to the rare sight of their champion being driven back. In the lower stands, some of the crowd were now chanting the human's name with fierce energy. Therval swung low, hoping to catch Kieran's legs. The human leapt back, then stepped in before the champion could recover his guard. The spear's butt slammed into the side of the beast's head, sending him stumbling. Kieran followed with another strike to the ribs, hearing the breath forced from his opponent's lungs. The champion tried to rally one last time. He swung his sword in a heavy arc, but Kieran caught it with the spear and twisted hard. The weapon wrenched from Therval's grip, clattering onto the sand. The crowd erupted in a mixture of shock and wild excitement. The champion was now weaponless against the man they had once expected to die in minutes. Kieran didn't waste the moment. He stepped in close, grabbing the champion by the neck and twisting his body with sudden brutal force. There was a sharp, sickening crack that cut through the roar of the crowd. Therval collapsed onto the sand, unmoving, as the arena exploded with a sound like thunder. The arena floor was silent for a single heartbeat after the sound of breaking bone. Then the silence shattered into a deafening roar. Thousands of voices screamed at once, some in celebration, others in outrage. Kieran stood over the fallen champion, his chest heaving, his eyes locked on the imperial box. The Emperor did not move at first. His golden eyes studied the human with a calm that felt almost unnatural. The nobles beside him were whispering fiercely, their faces pale. Kieran could not hear their words, but he knew they were speaking of what this victory meant. A human had just killed the undefeated champion of Varrock. Two guards approached from the arena gates, their weapons drawn. For a moment, Kieran thought they meant to attack, but instead, they knelt beside Therval's body, checking for life. One shook his head. The champion was gone. The crowd's chanting shifted again, a wave of voices now shouting Kieran's name. Kieran raised the spear. Slightly, not in victory, but as a sign he was ready for whatever came next. Blood dripped from the weapon's tip, falling onto the sand. The heat of the arena seemed less now, replaced by the electric tension of thousands watching for the Emperor's command. The emperor finally rose from his throne. His tall figure cast a long shadow over the nobles around him. With a slow, deliberate movement, he raised one hand. The crowd's roar fell into silence, as if every voice had been cut at once. His gaze stayed fixed on Kiran, and his lips curved into something. That was not quite a smile. "You have done what no one else could," the emperor's voice boomed across the arena. The words were carried by the strange amplification of alien technology. "You have earned more than your life today, human." His tone was both praise and warning, and it sent a ripple through the audience. The guards stepped forward again, but this time they did not raise their weapons. Instead, they gestured for Kiran to follow. He kept his grip on the spear as he walked toward the gate. Every step felt like it was carrying him deeper into unknown territory. The chants of the crowd followed him until the heavy iron doors closed. Behind him, inside the corridor, the air was cooler. Torches burned along the walls, casting long shadows. Kiran's breathing slowed, but his grip on the weapon did not loosen. The guards led him through twisting halls until they reached a massive set of golden doors. Without a word, they pushed them open and motioned him inside. The chamber beyond was unlike anything Kiran had seen. Rich carpets covered the floor, and tall windows let in beams of sunlight that lit the room in gold. The emperor stood at the far end, his hands clasped behind his back. He turned as Kiran entered, his expression unreadable. "You have proven strength," the emperor said, his voice quieter now but no less commanding. "But strength alone does not keep a man alive here. You have also proven will. I have a place for a man with such qualities." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Kiran knew his next choice could change everything. Kiran stood in the golden chamber, the weight of the emperor's words settling on him. The offer was dangerous. In this empire, a position close to the ruler could mean power, but it could also mean chains of a different kind. His eyes stayed locked on the emperor's, searching for any hint of the truth behind the calm expression. The emperor moved closer, his steps silent on the thick carpet. "You could serve me," he continued, "as a commander of my warriors. Your victory has already shaken my enemies. Imagine what you could do at the head of my army." His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, as if refusal would not be taken lightly. Kiran considered the choice. He had no loyalty to this place, no love for the empire that had thrown him into the arena for sport. But walking away was not an option that would be given freely. He could see the guards at the edges of the room, their hands resting on the hilts of their weapons. They were not there to protect him. Instead of answering immediately, Kiran stepped forward, holding the spear loosely in one hand. "If I serve, I do it on my terms," he said. "I fight for victory, not for your cruelty. My enemies will fall, but I will not be your tool to slaughter the innocent." His voice carried across the chamber like steel drawn from its sheath. The emperor's eyes narrowed slightly, though the faint smile never left his lips. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he let out a low, amused sound. "Few speak to me that way and live," he said. "But perhaps that is why you are still standing. Very well. Serve me, and I will give you what you demand. But fail me, and your end will be worse than the arena." His words cut through the air like a blade. The tension in the room was heavy, but Kiran gave a short nod. He had no illusions about the dangers ahead. Serving the emperor would be a path lined with enemies and betrayal. Yet it would also give him the means to survive and perhaps, one day, to turn that power against the throne itself. The emperor gestured to the guards who stepped aside to let Kiran pass. "Go," he commanded. "Rest. Your first command will be given at dawn." The words were final, leaving no room for argument. Kiran walked past the guards, his grip on the spear still tight. Every step away from the throne felt like walking deeper into a storm. As he left the chamber, the noise of the arena returned faintly through the walls. The crowd was still speaking his name, though now it carried a new tone. He was no longer just a human who had survived. He was the warrior who had killed the champion and been chosen by the emperor himself. That title would bring respect, but also danger. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting the city of Varak in gold and shadow. The streets were alive with talk of the fight, merchants shouting about the human who had done the impossible. Kieran walked through them without slowing, his eyes scanning every face. He knew fame could be as deadly as any blade. As night fell, he reached the quarters assigned to him. Inside, the room was richly furnished, a stark contrast to the cell where he had begun this trial. Yet he knew luxury was only another kind of cage. Sitting by the window, he looked out over the city and tightened his grip on the spear. Whatever came next, he would be ready.